I opened the door to find the process server standing there with a manila envelope, and I couldn't stop the smile that curved my lips. "Caroline Chen?" he asked. "That's me." He handed me the envelope, got my signature, and left. I stood in the doorway of my modest apartment, holding the document I'd been waiting 6 months for, and felt the first real rush of satisfaction I'd experienced since waking up on my 25th birthday for the second time. Inside was a summons, a lawsuit, the first of many, but this time I was ready. This time I was the registered agent. In my first life, I died at 32. My stepsister Veronica pushed me down the stairs of the family company's headquarters after I discovered she'd been embezzling millions. The fall didn't kill me immediately. I spent 3 days in the hospital paralyzed. While she sat by my bedside and whispered all the ways she'd destroyed me. She'd stolen my designs and passed them off as her own. She'd poisoned my father against me, making him believe I was unstable, jealous, incompetent. She'd systematically dismantled every relationship I had, every achievement, every shred of credibility. And when I finally found the evidence of her crimes, she made sure I'd never be able to tell anyone. "You were always so stupid, Caroline," she'd said, stroking my hair while I lay there unable to move or speak. "Did you really think Father would ever choose you over me? You were just the consolation prize after Mom died. I'm the real daughter. I'm the heir." Then she'd adjusted my IV, and I'd slipped away. When I woke up on my 25th birthday, 7 years in the past, I spent the first hour vomiting and the next 24 planning. I knew everything that was coming, every deal Veronica would make, every person she'd manipulate, every crime she'd commit. I knew which suppliers she'd defraud, which clients she'd bribe, which environmental regulations she'd violate to cut costs. I knew it all because in my first life, I'd been the one to uncover it. Too late to matter, too late to save myself. But I also knew something else. Veronica's greatest strength was her ability to insulate herself. She never put her name on anything dirty. She always used shell companies, intermediaries, proxies. In my first life, even with all my evidence, the lawyer said it would be nearly impossible to prove she was behind it all. Unless someone had legal access to all the documents. Oh, someone who would receive every lawsuit, every subpoena, every legal notice sent to her companies. Someone who could control the flow of information, delay responses, accidentally ensure damaging documents were preserved instead of destroyed. Someone like a registered agent. I spent the first year of my second life preparing. I didn't confront Veronica. I didn't warn my father. I played the same role I'd played before, the quiet, competent daughter who worked hard and never caused trouble. But this time, I was building something. I got my paralegal certification. I started a small registered agent service, the kind that provides statutory agents for businesses in multiple states. It was legitimate, professional, affordable. And when Veronica started setting up her first shell company at 26, right on schedule, I made sure my service looked like the perfect solution. "Caroline, I didn't know you were doing this," she'd said when I mentioned it at a family dinner, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "How entrepreneurial." "Just trying to build something of my own," I'd replied, meeting her eyes. "I thought maybe I could help you, actually. I know you've been talking about expanding Chen Industries into new ventures. If you need registered agent services, I offer a family discount." She'd laughed, that tinkling sound that made me want to scream. "That's actually perfect. I was just looking into setting up a subsidiary. Having you handle it would keep things in the family." She thought she was doing me a favor, throwing me scraps while she built her empire of fraud. She had no idea she just handed me the keys to her destruction. That first lawsuit in my hands was from a supplier in Nevada, Apex Materials. I knew this case intimately. In my first life, Veronica had ordered substandard materials from them for a commercial building project, forged the quality certificates, and when the building developed structural issues 2 years later, she'd buried the evidence and let Apex take the fall. The lawsuit would have been settled quietly if Veronica had handled it properly, but she couldn't handle it properly because she never saw it coming in the first place. I'd made sure of that. As her registered agent, I received all legal correspondence for her shell company, Pacific Development LLC. According to our service agreement, I was required to forward any legal documents to her within 2 business days. But there were so many ways for things to get delayed. A misplaced email, an incorrect address on file, a postal delay. This particular summons gave her 20 days to respond to the lawsuit. By the time she actually received it from me, she'd have 10. But that wasn't the beautiful part. The beautiful part was that I'd also received that same week subpoenas for 3 other Veronica-controlled entities, a demand letter from an environmental advocacy group, and a notice of audit from the state tax authority, all of which I was legally required to forward to her. All of which I forwarded in a single overwhelming package, timed to arrive the day before she was leaving for a 2-week vacation in the Maldives. I knew about the vacation because in my first life, she'd gone on the same trip. She'd posted about it constantly on social media while I was drowning in work at Chen Industries, covering for her absence. This time, I watched from my laptop as her assistant frantically tried to reach her, as deadlines slipped past, as default judgments were entered because no one responded in time, as the first cracks appeared in her perfect facade. "Caroline, what the hell happened?" Veronica stormed into my office 3 weeks later, her designer heels clicking against the worn linoleum. My office was actually just a shared workspace in a strip mall, but it was mine, and it was legitimate, and most importantly, it was where I controlled the flow of information to 12 different Veronica-controlled entities. "I need you to explain why I have a default judgment against Pacific Development," she said. Slamming papers onto my desk, I looked up from my computer, carefully arranging my expression into one of confusion and concern. "What? I forwarded you that lawsuit as soon as I received it." "You sent it to me the day before I left for vacation." "I sent it the day I received it," I corrected. "I'm required to forward legal documents within 2 business days. I actually sent it the same day, which is faster than required." Her jaw clenched. "You could have called me. Our service agreement doesn't include phone notifications. That's a premium service tier. You chose the basic package." I pulled up the contract on my screen, turned it toward her. "See Section 4.2, email notification only." I watched her struggle to control her anger. She couldn't yell at me too much. Not when I was providing a service. Not when I was doing exactly what our contract specified. Not when she was the one who'd chosen the cheapest option. "Fine," she said tightly. "I need you to set up phone notifications going forward. For all my entities? Of course. I'll send you the updated service agreement with the new pricing." "I don't care about the price, Caroline. Just do it." I nodded, already knowing she'd never sign that updated agreement because in 3 days, she'd be dealing with something much bigger than a supplier lawsuit. The environmental lawsuit hit like a bomb. In my first life, Veronica's company had illegally dumped chemical waste from a manufacturing project into a protected wetland. She'd bribed the inspector and buried the evidence. The truth didn't come out until 6 years later, long after the statute of limitations for criminal charges had passed. This time, I'd made sure the evidence came out immediately. As registered agent, I'd received the environmental impact reports that Veronica's project manager had filed, the real ones, not the doctored versions she'd submitted to the state. I'd also received the internal emails discussing the illegal dumping, and when the environmental advocacy group sent their initial demand letter. I'd carefully preserved everything. Then I'd sent an anonymous package to their lawyers. The lawsuit was filed in federal court. The damages claimed were in the 8 figures. And because it was a federal case, it came with significantly more scrutiny, significantly more discovery requirements, and significantly less room for Veronica to maneuver. I received the summons on a Tuesday morning. I forwarded it to Veronica immediately, with a phone call this time, because I wanted to hear her voice when she realized what was happening. "This is insane," she said. "This is a shakedown. These environmental groups just target successful companies and..." "The complaint includes pretty specific allegations," I said, scanning the document. "Dates, locations, chemical compositions. They seem to have detailed evidence." "They don't have anything. It's all speculation." "They have photos, soil samples, witness testimony." I kept my voice professionally neutral. "You're going to need a good environmental attorney. I need you to make this go away. I'm your registered agent, not your lawyer. I just received documents." "Then receive them slower." Her voice was sharp now, panicked. You're my sister, Caroline. You're supposed to be on my side." It took everything in me not to laugh. "I am on your side, Veronica. That's why I'm making sure you get all the legal documents promptly so you can mount the best defense possible." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I need to talk to Father," she finally said, and hung up. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my small office, and let myself smile. In my first life, my father had always chosen Veronica. every single time. When I came to him with concerns about her business practices, he dismissed me as jealous. When I showed him evidence of financial irregularities, he said I was trying to undermine her. When I begged him to investigate before it was too late, he said I was being dramatic. He'd loved her more, trusted her more, believed in her more. And in the end, she'd destroyed him too. But only after I was dead and couldn't see it. This time, I wasn't trying to warn him. I was just going to let him watch. I knew Veronica would run to him. She always did when she was in trouble. And I knew exactly what she'd say, that this lawsuit was frivolous, that she was being targeted unfairly, that she needed Chen Industries' resources to fight it. And my father, James Chen, self-made millionaire and eternal optimist, would believe her. He'd put up the money for her defense. He'd use Chen Industries' legal team to help her. He'd stand by his daughter, his favorite daughter. What he wouldn't know, what Veronica didn't even know yet, was that the environmental lawsuit was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, I received a subpoena for another of Veronica's entities, Sunrise Investment Group. This was the shell company she used for her real estate fraud scheme, where she'd been buying properties, falsifying inspection reports, and flipping them to unsuspecting buyers. In my first life, one of those properties had been sold to a young family. The house had foundation problems that Veronica had concealed. When the family discovered the damage and tried to sue, Veronica had used every legal delay tactic in the book, dragging the case out for years until they ran out of money for attorneys and settled for pennies. The mother had written me a letter before I died. She'd somehow found out I was trying to expose Veronica's crimes. She'd told me about her family's nightmare, the house that was literally crumbling around them, the savings they'd lost, the stress that had contributed to her husband's heart attack. "I hope you succeed," she'd written. "Someone has to stop her." I hadn't succeeded, but I'd never forgotten that letter. This time, when the family's lawsuit was filed, I made sure Veronica received every single document on time. And then I made sure they received something extra. An anonymous package containing every falsified inspection report, every email where Veronica had ordered the concealment of defects, every piece of evidence that would turn their civil case into potential criminal fraud charges. The family's attorney was good. Better than I expected. Within a month, they'd amended their complaint to include fraud, misrepresentation, and racketeering claims under RICO. That last one was the key. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, allowed for treble damages and could pierce corporate veils. If they proved a pattern of fraud across multiple properties, they could go after Veronica's personal assets. I forwarded Veronica the amended complaint on a Friday evening. She called me within an hour, her voice shaking. "Caroline, did you see this?" "Yes, it looks serious." "They're claiming I'm running a criminal enterprise. The allegations do appear to establish a pattern of fraudulent conduct across multiple transactions," I said, reading from the complaint. "Have you talked to your attorney?" "My attorney says this could expose me to criminal prosecution." "That does seem possible based on the evidence they're citing." "What evidence?" "How do they have all this?" I paused, letting the question hang in the air. "I don't know, Veronica. But as your registered agent, I have to tell you, they've also subpoenaed all corporate records for Sunrise Investment Group. I'll need to compile everything and produce it within 30 days. "No, you can't give them anything." "I'm legally required to comply with the subpoena. If I don't, I could be held in contempt." "Then fight it. Get it quashed." "I'm not the party to the lawsuit, Veronica. I can't fight the subpoena. You'd need to file a motion to quash, but given that you're the defendant and these are corporate records of the entity being sued, I don't think a court would grant it." Another long silence. Then, "I need to call Father." She hung up before I could respond. I pulled up my spreadsheet, the one where I was tracking all the lawsuits, all the deadlines, all the cascading consequences. The environmental case was in discovery. The Apex Materials case was heading toward trial. The RICO case would take months to develop, but it was already generating negative press. And I had 6 more lawsuits ready to drop. The thing about being a registered agent is that you become intimately familiar with someone's business operations. Every contract, every formation document, every annual report flows through you. You see the structure of their empire, all the little entities they've created to compartmentalize their activities and limit their liability. You see the weaknesses, Veronica had built her network of shell companies like a fortress, with walls and moats and layers of protection, but she'd made one critical mistake. She'd used the same registered agent for all of them, me, which meant I saw everything. The money flowing between entities, the contracts that contradicted each other, the tax filings that didn't match the corporate documents, the operating agreements that violated state law. In my first life, I'd uncovered pieces of this puzzle. Now I had the whole picture, and I was using it to orchestrate her destruction with surgical precision. The next lawsuit I triggered was the one I'd been most looking forward to, the investor fraud case. Veronica had raised money for a development project through one of her entities, Pinnacle Holdings LLC, promising investors a 15% annual return. She'd shown them projections, financial statements, beautiful architectural renderings. She'd collected $8 million from 23 investors, most of them friends of our father or connections from Chen Industries. And then she'd used the money to fund her other ventures, paying early investors with new investor money in a classic Ponzi scheme. In my first life, the whole thing had collapsed 3 years down the line, destroying countless relationships and nearly bankrupting several families who'd trusted the Chen name. This time, I made sure it collapsed much faster. As registered agent, I'd received Pinnacle's annual reports, which Veronica had falsified. I'd also received notices of several investors asking for updates, which she'd been dodging. And I'd received a particularly aggressive demand letter from one investor, Marcus Reeves, a former business partner of our father's, threatening legal action if he didn't receive his quarterly distribution. I responded to Marcus's letter with pristine professionalism, forwarding his inquiry to Veronica and copying him on the email per his request. I also happened to attach, in what appeared to be a clerical error, Pinnacle's internal financial statements, the real ones, showing that the company had virtually no assets and was operating at a massive loss. Marcus's lawsuit was filed within a week. Within 2 weeks, all 23 investors had joined as co-plaintiffs. The complaint was devastating. It laid out the entire scheme with brutal clarity, complete with financial records that could have only come from inside the company. It named not just Pinnacle Holdings, but Veronica personally, alleging she'd made material misrepresentations while soliciting investments. It also named our father. That was the part I felt guilty about. James Chen wasn't a defendant, but he was mentioned repeatedly in the complaint as someone who'd introduced investors to his daughter's company, who'd vouched for her credibility, who'd lent his reputation to her fraud. I knew it would devastate him. But I also knew that in my first life, Veronica's crimes had destroyed him anyway. Destroyed his company, his reputation, everything he'd built. This time, at least, he might learn the truth while there was still time to salvage something. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally see who his daughters really were. Caroline, I need to talk to you. In person. My father's voice on the phone was tired in a way I'd never heard before. He was 63, still vigorous and sharp, but he sounded ancient. Of course, Dad. When? Now. Can you come to the house? I looked at the clock. It was 9 p.m. No, I'll be there in 30 minutes. The Chen family home was a sprawling estate in the hills, the kind of place my father had bought to prove he'd made it. My mother had died when I was 8, and he'd married Veronica's mother 2 years later. She'd died of cancer when Veronica and I were both teenagers, leaving us as stepsisters who'd never quite figured out how to be sisters. Or rather, leaving me as the stepsister who'd never been good enough to compete with the real daughter. I pulled up the circular driveway and saw my father waiting on the front steps. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched under his cardigan. Dad, I said, getting out of the car. What's wrong? He gestured for me to follow him inside. We went to his study, the room where he'd built his fortune through late nights and careful planning. The walls were lined with photos of his achievements, groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, awards. There were photos of Veronica, too. Veronica graduating, Veronica at company events, Veronica smiling. There were fewer photos of me. I've been reviewing the investor lawsuit, he said, settling into his leather chair. He looked old. When had he gotten so old? The allegations against Veronica. I saw the complaint, I said carefully. It's serious. The investors are people I've known for decades, Caroline. Marcus Reeves is one of my oldest friends. I'm the one who introduced him to Veronica's project. I know. They trusted me. They invested because I vouched for her. I stayed silent, watching him struggle with the realization that was slowly dawning. "The financial records in the complaint," he continued. "They show that Pinnacle Holdings never had the assets Veronica claimed, that the whole project was—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "A fraud," I said quietly. "Yes." His hands were shaking. "How long have you known?" This was the moment where I could tell him everything. About my rebirth, about knowing the future, about watching him choose Veronica over me again and again until it destroyed us both. The moment where I could beg him to believe me, to trust me, to finally see the truth, but I knew better. Even now, even with the evidence in front of him, he wanted to believe in Veronica. I could see it in his eyes, the desperate hope that there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. So I gave him something simpler, something he could accept. "I didn't know about the fraud," I said, "but as Veronica's registered agent, I receive all the corporate documents, I see the discrepancies, the financial statements that don't match the tax filings, the contracts that don't align with the representations made to investors." "And you didn't tell me?" "Would you have believed me, Dad?" The question hung in the air between us. We both knew the answer. "I want to believe there's an explanation," he said finally, "that Veronica made mistakes, but not deliberate fraud." "Then you should talk to her." "I've tried. She's not answering my calls." That surprised me. In my first life, Veronica had always run to Father when she was in trouble. But this time, the trouble was so much bigger, so much faster. Maybe even she could see that Father couldn't fix this. "I need you to help me understand something, Caroline." He leaned forward, his eyes searching my face. "You're her registered agent for 12 different entities. You receive all her legal documents. How is she getting sued so much all at once?" This was the dangerous question, the one I'd been preparing for. "I receive the lawsuits," I said carefully. "I don't control when they're filed. From what I can see, there are a lot of people who feel they've been wronged by Veronica's companies. Suppliers who weren't paid, investors who lost money, property buyers who discovered defects, environmental groups concerned about violations. Once the first few lawsuits were filed and became public record, other people with grievances probably felt empowered to come forward. It's like dominoes falling." "Yes." He studied me for a long moment, and I wondered if he could see the truth in my eyes. If he could sense that I was the one who'd pushed the first domino, who'd orchestrated this cascade of consequences. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he said. "Your mother, your real mother, I mean. She was so principled, so honest. She would have been devastated to see what's happening." My throat tightened. I barely remembered my mother, but I remembered her voice, her warmth, her insistence that we always do the right thing. "She would have wanted the truth to come out," I said, "no matter how painful." He nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." He stood, walked to the window overlooking the garden my mother had planted. "I'm going to have to step back from Veronica's legal defense. The investors are my friends. If I help her fight them, I'll lose every relationship I have in this city." "I understand. But she's still my daughter. Caroline, I can't just abandon her." There it was. The same choice, the same loyalty, the same favoritism. Even now. "I know, Dad." He turned to face me. "You've been helping her, though, managing her registered agent services, making sure she gets all the legal documents. That's more than I could have asked." I almost laughed. He thought I was helping her. He had no idea that every document I faithfully forwarded, every deadline I meticulously tracked, every piece of evidence I carefully preserved was another nail in her coffin. "I'm just doing my job," I said. The lawsuits kept coming. A former employee sued for wrongful termination after being fired for refusing to falsify safety reports. A contractor sued for breach of contract after Veronica refused to pay for completed work. A neighboring property owner sued for nuisance after one of Veronica's developments contaminated their well water. Each lawsuit was legitimate. Each one represented real harm Veronica had caused. And each one landed on my doorstep first, giving me the power to control the timing, the narrative, the evidence trail. I was meticulous. I never broke the law, never violated my duties as registered agent, never did anything that could be challenged in court. I simply did exactly what I was supposed to do, receive legal documents and forward them to my client, with the kind of precision and reliability that ensured nothing slipped through the cracks. In my first life, Veronica had survived through chaos and obfuscation. documents got lost, deadlines were missed through strategic incompetence, evidence disappeared. She'd weaponized disorder, making it impossible to pin her down. This time, everything was perfectly organized. Every lawsuit tracked, every deadline noted, every piece of evidence preserved and produced. I was killing her with competence. 3 months into the legal avalanche, Veronica finally came to my office again. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, her designer clothes hanging a little looser, her perfect makeup unable to conceal the stress. "I need to fire you," she said without preamble. I'd been expecting this. "Okay, let me pull up the termination procedures for each entity." She blinked, apparently surprised by how easily I was agreeing. "That's it? You're not going to fight me?" "Why would I? If you want a different registered agent, that's your prerogative." "Because you're my sister. Because I gave you this business." I met her eyes, keeping my expression neutral. "You hired me for a service, Veronica. I've provided that service exactly as contracted. If you're unhappy with the arrangement, you're free to terminate it." Unhappy? I have 17 active lawsuits. 17? All of them came through you. They came through me because I'm your registered agent. That's literally what a registered agent does. Receives legal documents. You're supposed to protect me? I'm supposed to receive service of process on your behalf, which I've done. If you wanted someone to protect you from lawsuits, you should have hired a lawyer, not a registered agent. Her hands clenched into fists. You've been sabotaging me. Somehow you've been sabotaging me. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence? How else would all these people suddenly decide to sue me at the same time? Maybe because you defrauded them? The words came out before I could stop them, sharper than I'd intended. Veronica went very still. "What did you say?" I stood, gathering the termination paperwork I'd already prepared, knowing this moment was coming. "I said maybe people are suing you because you actually did the things they're accusing you of. Environmental violations, investor fraud, property defects, employee retaliation. These aren't random lawsuits, Veronica. They're the consequences of your actions." "You self-righteous bitch." Her voice was low, venomous. "You've always been jealous of me, always trying to undermine me, make Father doubt me. And now you're using this registered agent position to destroy me." "I'm not destroying you," I said quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure the evidence is preserved." She lunged across the desk, grabbing my laptop. "What's on here? What evidence have you been collecting?" I didn't try to stop her. I'd been careful. Everything on my computer was legitimate business records, properly maintained files. Nothing that could be construed as improper. My real planning, my real knowledge from my first life, existed only in my head. "Go ahead," I said. "Look through it. You'll find client files properly organized and maintained according to legal requirements. Exactly what a registered agent is supposed to keep." She stared at the screen, scrolling frantically through folders, finding nothing incriminating. Finally, she shoved the laptop back across the desk. "I'm terminating your services effective immediately for all entities." "You can't do that." "What? Termination requires 14 days' notice according to our service agreement. And you need to designate a new registered agent before you can remove me. Most states require an entity to have a registered agent at all times." Her face went red. "Fine. 14 days, then you're out." "I'll need written termination notices for each entity, signed by the authorized representatives. I'll send them today." "Great. In the meantime, you should know that 3 new lawsuits arrived this morning." I held out the envelopes I'd been planning to mail her. You'll need to coordinate with your new registered agent about forwarding procedures for any documents that arrive during the transition period." She snatched the envelopes from my hand and stormed out. I sat back down, pulled up my spreadsheet, and marked the date. 14 days until I was officially out as her registered agent. 14 days to make sure every remaining piece of evidence was exactly where it needed to be. The termination of our registered agent relationship was almost anticlimactic. Veronica hired a large corporate service company, the kind with offices in every state and automated systems. Professional, impersonal, efficient. Exactly the kind of service that wouldn't notice the patterns I'd noticed, that wouldn't connect the dots between entities, that would simply process documents without seeing the larger picture. But by then it didn't matter. The lawsuits were filed, the evidence was preserved, the dominoes were falling. My role was finished. Or so I thought. 6 months after I stopped being Veronica's registered agent, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Miss Chen, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with the District Attorney's White Collar Crime Division. My heart started racing. Yes? We're investigating allegations of fraud related to several business entities, and your name has come up as the former registered agent. We'd like to ask you some questions. Of course. Should I bring an attorney? That's your right, though you're not a target of the investigation. We're just gathering information about the corporate structures and document handling. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse. The Detective Morrison was in her 40s. Sharp-eyed with a thick folder of documents, she ordered a black coffee and got right to business. You were the registered agent for 12 different entities controlled by Veronica Chen. Is that correct? Yes. For how long? Approximately 18 months. And during that time, you received all legal documents on behalf of those entities? That's correct. She pulled out a timeline. What's interesting is that before you became the registered agent, these entities had very few legal issues. During the 18 months you served as agent, they were hit with more than 20 lawsuits, and after you left, the lawsuits slowed down again. I kept my expression neutral, my voice steady. The timing does seem coincidental. Does it? She leaned forward. Or did you have something to do with it? I don't control when people file lawsuits, Detective. I just receive them. But you received them very efficiently. Every single lawsuit was forwarded to Miss Chen with perfect documentation. Every subpoena was complied with fully. Every deadline was tracked and noted. It's actually the most comprehensive record-keeping we've seen in a case like this. I take my professional responsibilities seriously. I'm sure you do. She pulled out another document. We've also noticed that several of the lawsuits were filed by plaintiffs who received anonymous packages of evidence that could have only come from inside the companies. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice calm. I'm not aware of any anonymous packages. Of course not, she smiled slightly. But hypothetically, if someone who had access to corporate records wanted to ensure that wrongdoing was exposed, sending evidence to potential plaintiffs would be one way to do it. Hypothetically, that person would be violating their fiduciary duties and could face legal liability. Unless the evidence showed criminal activity, then they might be protected as a whistleblower. We looked at each other across the table. I could see her making calculations, trying to figure out if I was a source she could cultivate or a target she needed to investigate. Why are you really here, Detective? She closed her folder. We're building a criminal case against Veronica Chen. Fraud, racketeering, environmental crimes. The civil lawsuits created a roadmap for our investigation, but we need more than civil evidence. We need someone who understands the corporate structure, who can explain how the shell companies were used to conceal criminal activity. And you think I can help with that? I think you saw everything. I think you know exactly how she operated. She paused. I also think you had a reason to want her exposed. The question is whether you'll help us officially, or whether we'll have to subpoena you and risk you taking the fifth. I thought about my first life, about dying in that hospital bed, while Veronica whispered her confession, about all the people she'd hurt, all the crimes she'd gotten away with, about my father's broken trust, and the investors who'd lost their savings and the family living in a crumbling house. If I were to cooperate, I said slowly, I'd want immunity for anything I might have done as registered agent. You'd have to be specific about what you need immunity for. Hypothetically, if I had shared confidential corporate documents with potential plaintiffs, or if I had delayed forwarding legal documents in a way that might have disadvantaged my client, or if I had used my position to gather evidence of criminal activity, hypothetically, I'd want protection for those actions. Detective Morrison pulled out a business card, wrote a name and number on the back. Talk to this attorney. She handles whistleblower cases. If you have information about criminal activity, she can work with the DA's office to get you immunity. I took the card. And if I don't cooperate, then we'll investigate you too, because something doesn't add up, Miss Chen. You're either the most diligent registered agent in history, or you're something else entirely. She stood, leaving money on the table for her coffee. Think about it. We're preparing to arrest Veronica next month. The case would be a lot stronger with your testimony. After she left, I sat there for a long time, looking at the business card. I'd planned for the civil lawsuits, I'd anticipated the financial destruction, the reputation damage, the systematic dismantling of Veronica's empire, but I hadn't expected the criminal investigation to move this fast. Maybe I should have. In my first life, Veronica's crimes had eventually caught up with her, years too late, after she'd destroyed countless lives. This time, the compressed timeline, the perfect documentation, the overwhelming evidence had accelerated everything. The question was whether I wanted to be there for the final act. I called the attorney. Her name was Rebecca Torres, and she specialized in whistleblower protection and qui tam cases. We met in her office, a sleek suite in a downtown high-rise. "Detective Morrison sent you?" she asked, gesturing for me to sit. "Yes, she suggested I might need immunity." "Tell me what you did." So I told her. Not about the rebirth. I wasn't that crazy, but about the rest of it. About systematically gathering evidence, about timing the forwarding of documents to maximize legal pressure, about the anonymous packages sent to plaintiffs. Rebecca listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You were in a unique position," she said finally. "As registered agent, you had access to documents that proved criminal activity. The question is whether you had a duty to report that activity or a duty to maintain client confidentiality." "Both," I said. "Registered agents have to maintain confidentiality, but there's also a legal obligation to report certain crimes." "Exactly. And the evidence you preserved could be seen as either a breach of confidentiality or fulfillment of a legal obligation, depending on how we frame it. Can you get me immunity? Probably. The DA wants to prosecute Veronica Chen, not you. You're small fish, and you have information they need, but you need to be completely honest with me about everything you did." I hesitated. Even if some of it was questionable? Especially if it was questionable. I can't protect you from surprises. So I told her more. About tracking the lawsuits in my spreadsheet, about coordinating the timing of document production, about understanding exactly how to comply with legal requirements in ways that would maximize damage to Veronica. Rebecca's expression didn't change. When I finished, she said, "You didn't do anything illegal." Unethical? Maybe, depending on how you interpret a registered agent's duties. But you forwarded all documents, you complied with all subpoenas, you maintained proper records. A good prosecutor could argue you were just doing your job extremely well. And a bad prosecutor could argue you violated client confidentiality and used your position to harm your client. That's why we want immunity. She drafted a proffer letter to the DA's office, outlining what I knew and what I'd done, so offering my cooperation in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Within a week, we had an agreement. I would testify about the corporate structures, the document flows, the evidence I'd preserved. In exchange, I would receive immunity for any actions taken in my capacity as registered agent. The DA's office was ecstatic. I was, apparently, the perfect witness. Knowledgeable, credible, and armed with documents that proved every element of their case. Veronica was arrested on a Tuesday morning at the Chen Industries headquarters. The media was there. Someone had tipped them off, though I had no idea who. The footage showed her being led out in handcuffs, her face pale with shock, as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. My father called me that night. "Did you know?" he asked. His voice was hollow. "That she was going to be arrested? Yes. The DA's office contacted me a few weeks ago." "And you didn't warn her?" "No." Silence. Then, "Why, Caroline? She's your sister." "She killed me, Dad." The words came out before I could stop them, raw and honest. "What?" I closed my eyes, realizing what I'd said. In my first life, I died trying to expose her crimes. She pushed me down the stairs at the office. I spent 3 days paralyzed in the hospital while she sat by my bed and confessed everything she'd done to destroy me. Then she killed me. More silence. Then, carefully, "Caroline, that doesn't make any sense. You're alive." I was reborn. I woke up on my 25th birthday, 7 years in the past, with all my memories intact, and I decided that this time, I wouldn't confront her. I'd just make sure the truth came out. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing what I'd said. "You're telling me you remember a life that hasn't happened? A life that won't happen now, because this time, Veronica won't get away with it. Caroline, have you been under a lot of stress?" He thought I was delusional. Of course he did. I sounded insane. "I know how it sounds, Dad, but think about it. How else would I have known to position myself as her registered agent? How would I have known which companies to target, which lawsuits were coming, which evidence to preserve? I knew because I'd seen it all before. Or you could have just been very thorough in investigating her business practices. I could have, but I wasn't. I just remembered. Another long pause. Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying I believe it, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me before it got this bad? Would you have believed me? The question hung between us again. The same question I'd asked months ago. This time, though, it had a different weight. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe not. I wanted to believe in Veronica. I wanted to believe she was the daughter I raised to be honest and hardworking and successful. She was also your daughter, just like I am. I know, and I failed you, didn't I? In that other life and in this one. My throat tightened. I'm not looking for an apology, Dad. I just wanted the truth to come out. It's out now. She's been arrested for fraud, racketeering, environmental crimes. The DA says she's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. I know. And you're going to testify against her? Yes. Caroline, he sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. I don't know if I believe this rebirth story, but I believe that you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, and I'm sorry I didn't see it. Thank you. Will you come to the trial? Even if you're testifying, I mean. Will you be there? Why? Because I want you there. Because you're my daughter, and I should have told you that more often? I wiped my eyes, surprised by the tears. Okay, Dad, I'll be there. The trial was a media sensation. The DA had built an ironclad case with documents and testimony that laid out every element of Veronica's criminal enterprise. Former employees testified about being ordered to falsify reports. Investors testified about being defrauded. Environmental experts testified about the damage her companies had caused. And I testified about the corporate structure, the shell companies, the way Veronica had designed her business empire to insulate herself from liability. When I took the stand, Veronica stared at me with pure hatred. Her attorney tried to paint me as a jealous stepsister who'd sabotaged her client, but the evidence was overwhelming. The documents didn't lie. On the day I testified, I wore a simple navy suit and spoke clearly and calmly. I explained how registered agents work, how I'd maintained proper records, how I'd complied with all legal obligations. I never mentioned the rebirth, never hinted at my prior knowledge. I just presented the facts. The defense attorney cross-examined me for 3 hours. So trying to find inconsistencies, trying to prove I'd acted improperly, but I'd been so careful, so meticulous, that there was nothing to find. Isn't it true, Miss Chen, that you benefited financially from the lawsuits against your client? No. I was paid a flat fee for registered agent services, regardless of how much legal activity there was. But the lawsuits generated publicity for your business, didn't they? I suppose they did, though I'd prefer to be known for quality service rather than high-profile clients. And isn't it true that you had a personal vendetta against Miss Chen? I looked at Veronica, sitting at the defense table in her expensive suit, still beautiful despite the strain, still the favored daughter, even in disgrace. I had a desire to see the truth come out, I said. Whether you call that a vendetta or a moral obligation is a matter of perspective. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge gave Veronica 12 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay restitution to all the victims of her fraud. It was less than the maximum, but more than the minimum. Veronica showed no emotion as the sentence was read. My father sat in the gallery, looking like he'd aged a decade. When it was over, he found me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "She's going to appeal," he said. "They always do." "Will you be okay? After all this?" I thought about the question. Was I okay? I'd spent the last 2 years orchestrating my stepsister's destruction, becoming a witness in her criminal trial, watching her be sentenced to prison. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do, but I'd also lost something. The version of me that had died in my first life, the naive Caroline who'd believed in family loyalty and justice, was truly gone. This version of me was harder, more calculating, more willing to use people's weaknesses against them. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm different, but I'm okay." He pulled me into a hug, something he hadn't done in years. "I'm proud of you, for having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it was hard. I hugged him back, allowing myself this moment of connection. Thanks, Dad. What will you do now? Keep running the registered agent business? I shook my head. I think I'm done with that. I'm considering law school, actually. Really? I've learned a lot about the legal system over the past few years. I think I could be good at it. He smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. Your mother would have liked that. She always said you were meant for something important. 3 years later, I was in my second year of law school when I got a letter from Veronica. It was short, written on prison stationery in her precise handwriting. Caroline, I know what you did. I've had a lot of time to think about it, to piece together how everything fell apart so perfectly, so completely. You were too careful, too prepared. You knew everything that was coming. I don't know how you knew. Maybe you investigated me for years before you set your trap. Maybe you're just smarter than I ever gave you credit for. Either way, I underestimated you. I spent my whole life thinking I was better than you. Smarter. More ambitious. Yeah, more deserving of Father's love. I thought you were weak, passive, forgettable. I was wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking you to respond to this letter. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. You won. Veronica. I read the letter twice, then put it in a folder with all the other documents from the case. I'd kept everything. Every lawsuit, every piece of evidence, every reminder of what I'd accomplished. Not as a trophy, as a warning to myself about what I was capable of. Because the truth was, I'd enjoyed it. The planning, the execution, the perfect unfolding of Veronica's destruction. I'd enjoyed watching her squirm, watching her panic, watching her finally face consequences. That enjoyment scared me sometimes. It meant I'd changed in ways that went beyond just being smarter or more prepared. I'd become someone who could methodically dismantle another person's life and feel satisfaction rather than guilt. But I'd also become someone who stood up for victims, who preserved evidence, who ensured the truth came out. Someone who used the law as it was meant to be used, to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. I could live with that version of myself. 5 years after Veronica's conviction, I passed the bar exam and got a job at a small firm specializing in whistleblower cases and fraud litigation. The work was satisfying in ways I hadn't expected, helping people who'd been wronged, building cases against corporate malfeasance, using the system to achieve justice. My father came to my bar admission ceremony, beaming with pride. Chen Industries had survived Veronica's crimes, barely, but it was recovering under new management. My father had stepped back from day-to-day operations, focusing instead on rebuilding the relationships Veronica had damaged. Your mother would be so proud, he said, hugging me after the ceremony. A lawyer in the family. I learned from the best, I said. The lawyers who prosecuted Veronica showed me how powerful the law can be when it's used correctly. They had a very good witness, he said, smiling. We had dinner that night, just the two of us, at a quiet restaurant overlooking the water. Over dessert, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Do you ever regret it? The way you brought Veronica down? I thought about it carefully. I regret that it had to happen. I regret that she hurt so many people. But do I regret exposing her crimes? No. Even though it meant losing your sister? I lost my sister a long time ago, Dad. Maybe in another timeline. Maybe when she first decided that winning mattered more than integrity. Either way, the Veronica who went to prison wasn't someone I could save. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that other timeline you mentioned. The one where she killed you. You don't believe it happened. I don't know what I believe, but I know that you saved a lot of people from being hurt. The investors who got their money back, the family with the defective house who received compensation, the environment that was protected. If you really did live through this once before, then maybe that was the point, to come back and make it right. I smiled. That's a very optimistic interpretation. I'm an optimistic person, he said. Oh, it's one of my weaknesses. It's also one of your strengths. We finished dinner and walked along the waterfront, talking about cases I was working on and his plans for semi-retirement. It was peaceful, comfortable, the kind of evening I'd never imagined in my first life. Before we parted, he hugged me again. I love you, Caroline. I should have said that more often, should have shown it better. But I want you to know, I'm grateful you're my daughter. I love you too, Dad. I never responded to Veronica's letter. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound either cruel or dishonest. She knew what I'd done, and she knew why, and any words would just be decoration on a finished truth. But sometimes, late at night when I was working on a case, I'd think about her sitting in prison, thinking about the choices that led her there. I'd wonder if she understood that it wasn't just about revenge, that every lawsuit I'd facilitated represented real harm she'd caused, real people she'd hurt. I'd wonder if she'd changed at all, or if she still believed the only mistake she'd made was underestimating me. Mostly, though, I didn't think about Veronica. I thought about the future. My future. The one I was building with my own hands, instead of the one that had been stolen from me. I thought about the clients I was helping, the cases I was winning, the good I was doing in the world. I thought about using my knowledge of how things could go wrong to make sure they went right instead. And I thought about the fact that being someone's registered agent had taught me the most important lesson of all. Information is power, but only if you know how to use it. In my first life, I discovered Veronica's crimes too late. This time, I'd positioned myself at the center of the information flow, turning her own weapons against her. Every lawsuit that came to my door first became a tool for justice instead of an obstacle to overcome. It wasn't the revenge I'd fantasized about in those 3 days dying in a hospital bed. It was better. It was systematic, legal, and permanent. It was a registered agent doing her job with absolute perfection, and that perfection had been Veronica's undoing. 10 years after my rebirth, I was a partner at my firm, specializing in corporate fraud cases. My father had fully retired, spending his time on philanthropic work and rebuilding his reputation. Veronica was in year 7 of her sentence, eligible for parole in 5 more years. I was in my office reviewing a new case when my assistant buzzed me. "Caroline, there's someone here to see you. She says it's about a registered agent issue." I looked up, curious. "Send her in?" The woman who entered was in her 30s, professional but anxious. She sat down across from my desk and twisted her hands together. "My name is Jennifer Marks," she said. "I'm an accountant at a tech company. I've been noticing some irregularities in our financial statements, and I think my boss might be committing fraud." "Have you reported it internally?" I tried. I was told to mind my own business. She pulled out a folder. "I've been documenting everything, but I don't know what to do with it. Someone suggested I talk to you because you handled a similar case years ago." I opened the folder, scanning the financial records. The irregularities were obvious once you knew what to look for. Phantom revenue, inflated assets, hidden liabilities, classic fraud indicators. "This is serious," I said. "If you blow the whistle, there will be consequences. Your boss will know it was you." "I know, but people are investing in this company based on false information. Employees have their retirement savings tied up in stock that might be worthless. I can't just ignore it." I looked at Jennifer, seeing in her the person I'd been in my first life, someone who knew the truth and wanted to do the right thing, even if it cost her everything. "If you're serious about this," I said, "I can help you, but you need to understand the process. We'll need to gather more evidence, work with the SEC, possibly testify in court. It's not easy, and it's not quick." "Will it work?" "If the evidence is as solid as it looks, yes, it'll work." She nodded, determination settling over her features. "Then let's do it." As we began discussing strategy, I felt something shift inside me. This was why I'd become a lawyer. Not just to punish the guilty, but to help the brave. To give people like Jennifer the tools and support they needed to expose wrongdoing. In my first life, I'd been alone. This time, I could make sure no one else had to be. The Jennifer Marks case took 2 years to build and another year to prosecute. Her boss was convicted of securities fraud and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Jennifer received a whistleblower award and went on to start a consulting firm specializing in fraud detection. And I realized something. Being reborn hadn't just been about getting revenge on Veronica. It had been about learning to use my knowledge, my position, my resources to make things right. Every lawsuit that came to my door first became an opportunity for justice. Every client who walked into my office became someone I could help instead of someone I had to watch suffer. I'd been given a second chance at life, and I'd used it to make sure other people didn't need second chances because I'd helped them get it right the first time. On the 15th anniversary of my rebirth, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. The cemetery was peaceful, shaded by old oak trees, the headstones weathered but well-maintained. I stood in front of her marker, reading the familiar inscription, "Loving mother, devoted wife, woman of integrity." I wish you'd been here to see it," I said quietly. Everything that happened with Veronica, the trial, the conviction, the justice for all those people she hurt. The wind rustled through the leaves above me. I became a lawyer, Mom. I help people expose corporate fraud, protect whistleblowers, hold powerful people accountable. I think you would have approved. I knelt down, tracing the letters of her name. I also became someone who could be ruthless when necessary, someone who could plan a person's destruction and execute it flawlessly. I don't know if you would have approved of that part. No answer, of course, just the quiet of the cemetery and my own thoughts. But I think maybe you would have understood. You always said the truth matters, no matter how painful. And sometimes making the truth come out requires more than just being honest. It requires being strategic. I stood, brushing off my knees. I miss you. I wish I could remember you better. But I carry your legacy forward the best way I know how. As I walked back to my car, I thought about the fact that in my first life, I died without ever visiting my mother's grave. I'd been too busy, too focused on work, too consumed by the daily grind of trying to compete with Veronica. This time, I'd made time. This time, I'd honored her memory by becoming someone she'd be proud of. This time, I'd won. Veronica was released on parole after serving 10 years. She was in her 40s now, her beauty faded by prison life, her confidence shattered by consequences. She'd lost everything, her companies, her freedom, her reputation, her father's trust. She moved to a small town across the state and got a job as a bookkeeper at a local business. She kept her head down, followed the terms of her parole, and slowly rebuilt a quiet life. I heard about it through mutual contacts, but made no effort to reach out. We had nothing to say to each other. The past was settled, the scores were balanced, and the future was mine to build. Sometimes I wondered what she thought about during those quiet days in her new life, whether she understood the irony of being the registered agent's target instead of the client, whether she'd learned anything from her downfall or just resented the fact that she'd been caught. But mostly, I didn't think about Veronica at all. I was too busy with my own cases, my own clients, my own mission to make sure that when lawsuits came to someone's door first, they led to justice instead of destruction. 20 years after my rebirth, I was one of the most respected fraud litigators in the state. I'd won hundreds of cases, helped dozens of whistleblowers, recovered millions for victims of corporate crime. My father, now in his 80s, liked to joke that I'd done more to restore the Chen family name than he ever had. "You took something broken and made it right," he said one evening over dinner. "That's the best legacy anyone could ask for." "I learned from the best," I said, squeezing his hand. "No," he said seriously. "You did this yourself. You had the courage to stand up when it was hard, the intelligence to plan when it was complex, and the integrity to do it the right way." "Well, mostly the right way," I admitted. He smiled. "Nobody's perfect, Caroline." "Yeah, but you're pretty damn close." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of my rebirth, of my knowledge of what could have been, had gradually lifted as I built a life that was better than the one I'd lost. I'd started as the registered agent, the person who received lawsuits before anyone else. I'd ended as the attorney, the person who helped create those lawsuits in the first place. And somewhere in that journey, I'd found peace with who I'd become. Someone who'd been given a second chance and used it not just to destroy an enemy, but to build a better world. Every lawsuit that came to my door first now was an opportunity to make things right. And that, I decided, was the best revenge of all.